What's up, Dolphins? I'm Jim Greasehaber. Call me Grease. And just when you think they're blowing the whole thing up, no, not quite. We'll get into that today here on the show.
Hey, I'm Jess Canina. Hold your horses, Grease. They still may not be done.
Kyle Krabs, host of Locked on Dolphins, and just hoping we chill for give me 72 hours before anything else happens.
No. Hand another slipping.
Fins up. It's the Dolphins Squad. Everything Miami Dolphins every week. Breaking down all the big hits and game-changing plays from South Beach. The way only the Locked On Podcast Network can. Sunshine, speed, and squad goals. The Dolphins Squad Show starts now.
Yes, it does. Grease, Z, and Kyle, the busiest man in the NFL right now. Kyle Krabs, congrats, brother, on all those views yesterday. The Jaylen Waddle show going through the roof after the trade. And, I just want to start here because we don't have a title sponsor today, but I want to thank all the everydayers for being here and making us the #1 sports podcast network. I want to thank all of you who watch on YouTube. I want to thank all of you who download and listen wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're watching us on Roku or on any Tegna TV affiliate, you might not even know it's owned by Tegna, but you're watching us on a Tegna-owned TV station. And we appreciate all of you. And I hope you appreciate this man to our right as much as we do. Kyle Krabs, man, what a day you had yesterday. And Z, I want to throw it to you first because I don't know if you got to see Kyle's show on the Waddle trade, but you see the Alabama helmet behind him. You know it's his favorite player on the team. The man was in pain throughout the course of that show last night as he stuck to his guns where he's with the plan, not the man, and you could see the pain on Kyle's face, Z, doing the Goodbye Jaylen Waddle show.
No, I get it, and I feel for Kyle, but Kyle also knows in deep down his heart is the best thing for this organization to move forward. And I think he's going to, whoever they replace, Waddle with is going to, do great things and maybe even better things and is going to fit, what Bobby Slow is envisioning for that side of the ball. And I think it was one hell of a deal. And like I just said in my opener, I hope they're not done. I know they said they might be done, but I'm saying you might, at this point now, you might just start stockpiling draft picks for this year and next year and and just rebuild this team the right way. And this is like exciting times to be a Dolphin fan.
Got a nice haul for Waddle, Kyle. How you feeling today?
Yeah, I'm a fan of the Dolphins first, right? And that's when the players leave, I'm still going to be here with the franchise. And, this team now ranks number 2 in the NFL in draft capital for 2026. Right. And that being with where this team is at, I get it, and when the trade deadline stuff happened, I think we talked about on the show, like what would you take for Waddle? And I said a 1+, and it was like the plus needs to be another top 100 pick. They got that. So how mad can I really be with that haul for Jaylen Waddle when you look at the long-term scope, right? I think if you're going to make this, if you're going to commit to this path, the thing that I think they do need to do next, and I agree with Z on one thing, keep stockpiling picks. I just don't know that I necessarily agree with Achane being the piece to move when I'd like to have some kind of an identity on the offense, right? And I do think he's a special home run hitter as a back. I get there's that whole paying running backs and team's not going to be good next year conversation that's had, and that's just my personal assessment of Devon as a player is I'd like for him to be here for 2026. They've said they really want him to be here long-term. And I look at what you have at 30. I look at what you have at 11. My list of do not trade away from players at 11 is going to be really short. And if they get to 11 and those 3-4 guys are off the board, I'm probably going to be advocating trading back with the hope that go back however far you need to get a whole bunch of picks in 2027 in addition to what you have this year. Because just having a one-off of spike of picks it's going to make for a really fun April. But if you're going to build the infrastructure of the team, you need to do whatever you need to do to make sure that you have a multi-year surplus. Because that's what the last build was supposed to be built on. And then they traded all the picks for Bradley Chubb and Tyreek Hill, and they got a 1 and a 3 stripped from the team for the tampering stuff. So whatever you need to do to build that war chest of draft picks up, if this is what we're committing to, then do it, right? And I would just particularly like to see some semblance of an offensive identity remain if they believe in those players the way that they have kind of communicated and suggested that they do.
Yeah, that's well put, Kyle. And Z, when you talk about Jaylen Waddle, I mean, number 6 pick overall, had a really good career here. Kyle mentioned it on the show yesterday, often taking a back seat, unfortunately, to Tyreek Hill, and Waddle maybe not getting a lot of that love and credit he deserved, but he put up good numbers while he was here. And, they basically swapped 4th-round picks, but you bring back that first and you bring back a third, number 94 and number 130. They fell in line with what we thought that they should get if they traded. Were they to trade Jaylen Waddle, Z? And, it's part of the business, but as soon as they do that, they come right back out and they back it up and say, hey, Devon Achane is not available. Now we know, I mean, you see these grays. We know that, teams will say things that could be posturing. They might be trying to drive up the price. No one knows what's going to happen. Injuries, draft coming up, all kinds of things. And Kyle talks about an offensive identity. But what I'm wondering here, Z, if you can shed a little light on this, and I know you don't know for sure, but might this mean that Achane and his reps have said, and Kyle chime in on this too, might this mean that they're willing to work with the Dolphins in a contract year to extend and give them a little bit more relief?
I mean, they might. I mean, yeah, but again, Dolphins could be saying that too to drive the price up, to pry them out of that building. I mean, again, I still think you're going to listen to offers for the guy from other teams. If they give you a mid first, I mean, to me, that's a little rich for him, I think, being a running back. But if you get a first, you got to, look at it. Even a high second, you got to look at that. Because now you're stockpiling some picks and, maybe you want to go up and get that running back. You take your 11 and another first rounder. If you have 3 first rounders this year, let's say, hypothetically, you got to think about that too, So, again, I still think they're going to, listen to offers on the guy and, and everybody else on the team. Because, again, you're 175 in the hole going into the season. You got to shed some contracts somewhere to sign some players, And that's one way to do is get trade and get some trade value. You get rookie contracts that are easy to fit into the fold for the next couple of years.
Yeah, Kyle, and that's exactly what it is. You're taking shots on guys that, for whatever reason had made big money, and now you get them a little cheaper, and you have to hit on 1 or 2 of those guys, and you have to hit on 1 or 2 of the guys at least in this year's draft. But you've said it time and time again, over and over again, Kyle, draft capital, draft capital, draft capital. They're rebuilding what was squandered away under the previous regime, and they're coming in as a new regime, and they get a little bit of a honeymoon phase, right? Hey, they're doing the right things. They're shedding the skin. They're getting rid of things. But I wonder if this is, and we would have no way of knowing, some sort of posturing on their part, if they still are interested in trading Achane, or, if they're cognizant of trading away everybody and having a fan base turn on them. All those things are, in play here.
Yeah, I think the only way we'll know if this is posturing or not is if a trade happens, right? Yeah. And we may never know exactly what their intentions are. All I can point to is that when Jon-Eric Sullivan first took the job, he talked about pieces to build the roster around, and there were 4 names that he mentioned unprovoked, and it was Aaron Brewer, it was Jordan Brooks, it was Patrick Paul, and it was Devon Achane. And then he was asked about Devon Achane at the NFL Combine, and he used the adjective marvelous. He said he's a marvelous football player. We want him to be here. So if I look at everything else that Sully's talked about, he's talked about it starts with the quarterback. He's talked about we want to build the roster from the inside out. Says we need to build infrastructure on the roster. We're going to go for the quarterback first, but in a way that doesn't cripple the infrastructure of the football team. He talked about getting younger. They talked about working on the cap health and what that looks like. They've done all these things. So if I just take him for face value, and I understand there's a gamesmanship that happens here, and I know teams are calling. Adam Schefter reported today that teams are calling, right? But the feedback has been he's not available, which says you haven't reached that Goldilocks zone for us to stay on the line and think about it and talk about it. But I genuinely believe they don't want to move on from Devon Achane. But to Z's point, you get up into the stratosphere of a top 20, top 25 pick. I don't know how you say no, right? Because you can take that one pick, like at 30 or 11, like we talked about earlier. What's the domino effect and parlay of that if you turn that into more picks? And some of those are this year and some of those are next year. So there's a line in the sand that I think once you cross it, you have to entertain it. But based on the reporting from Schefter, I would assume that those conversations and those phone calls haven't remotely come close to broaching what that line in the sand is for them yet.
Yeah, and another important number to look at, Z, when you're talking about Achane, 24, as in years old. I mean, he could be the centerpiece of this rebuild at that age. I mean, he's not, past any kind of window to where that would be prohibitive, whereas maybe a guy like Chubb is age-wise.
Yeah, but again, like his contract's coming up too, right? I mean,
Yep.
You think about that too. You're taking, you have to go pay the guy, and if you don't pay him contract wise, you have to franchise him. That's why I'm saying they're still going to be thinking about if they get the right deal, he could be on the go just because of that going into a contract year.
Stay tuned, right? Stay tuned. He is one of the 4 that was mentioned in the beginning. And, of course, for Jaylen Waddle, I want to give our thoughts on Waddle real quick on his way out the door because, I mean, when he elevated to wide receiver 1 last year, he stepped up, met the challenge. Who knows where they would have been without him last year offensively. Probably their second best player on offense behind Achane last year would have been Waddle. And not coming back this year, Kyle, he put up some big numbers in a Miami uniform. He's one of the fastest receivers in the NFL. Still young enough to help a team. I know the Bills really wanted him and reportedly offered more than the Broncos, and you hate to see a guy go, and I'm sure they hate to trade him. It's just, what's going out versus what's coming in and what you think that player can do. But just if you would, for the squad audience, Kyle, put a bow on Jaylen Waddle. For Dolphin fans, put a bow on Jaylen Waddle's time in Miami.
Yeah, one of 6 receivers in franchise history to eclipse 5,000 career receiving yards with the Dolphins uniform on. It's Mark Duper, Mark Clayton, Nat Moore, Chris Chambers, O.J. McDuffie, Jaylen Waddle. That's the list. That's it. He finishes with 26 career receiving touchdowns as a member of the Dolphins. That's 8th all-time in a Dolphins uniform, 1 behind Tyreek Hill. And then the other names that we mentioned and Paul Warfield had 33. So, I mean, the history of this production that he had at the time, he set the rookie record for receiving receptions in a single season, and he did it in 16 games, right? He missed a game with COVID his rookie season, and that was like, he did it in 17 games. Well, he really did it in 16 games. He set the record before it got broken. So obviously you look at the tenure being over and when he was drafted and now in the prime of his career, and you could look at some other guys that got drafted in that window, but Jaylen Waddle is a very successful NFL player for the Dolphins. And I think it's a testament that they got more for him after 5 seasons of play with the team than they invested with him. Now, that's counting it a 1 and a 3 versus being the 6th overall pick. So it's not an equal amount of value with a first round pick, but 1 and a 3, as you look at depreciation, a lot of times you drive these guys off the lot. They play 5 years in the league. How many of them you say are worth more picks than what you spent to get a guy? Right.
Not
so
many.
I wish him nothing but the best in Denver. I think it's a great fit for him opposite Cortland Sutton. Eager to see what the Dolphins do. I'm expecting a double dip early, right? With these 7 top 100 picks. That's kind of been a thing the Packers have done a lot of. They've drafted Christian Watson was a 2nd round pick. Jaden Reed was a 2nd round pick. Romeo Doubs was a 4th round pick. Dontavian Wicks was a 5th round pick. And that was on like a 3-year span. So they've done double dips at tight end. They've done double dips at linebacker. They've done double dips at wide receiver. Jon-Eric Sullivan bringing that school of thought here. This is a good wide receiver class. So all the betting accounts got their jokes out on Tuesday with the Dolphins 2026 wide receiver room, and it's 5 random guys like in pictures and T-shirts and sneakers on the street or whatever. It's not going to look like that when it's done, because I have to imagine there's going to be some pretty hefty investments that come when it's all said and done to this room.
Yeah, and I see teams around the league writing on their official websites and newspapers and beat writers writing that their team should get in on the Dolphins fire sale. But is it a fire sale? When they say they're keeping Achane, it's not a fire sale if you're not dumping everybody. A fire sale was the 97 Marlins. That was a fire sale. I mean, they literally dumped everybody for money reasons. But the Dolphins are saying they still want to build around Achane. And guys, before we go to break, real quick, 44 games for Achane in his career. 3,057 rushing yards, 22 touchdowns. That's 5.6 yards per carry, 172 catches, 1,227 yards, 13 touchdowns. One of the best dual threat backs in football who had a breakout year in 2025. One of the few bright spots in an abysmal season for the Miami Dolphins. This is the Squad Show. It's Grease, it's Z, it's Kyle. What does that mean for Achane moving forward? What does that mean for the offense moving forward? How about the draft? Does that change anything at number 11? I heard a lot of Kyle's thoughts in some of the shows that he did leading up to this one. We'll get those again. We'll get Z's thoughts as well, and we'll keep it moving here on the Squad Show. Plus, the running theme of the day, put it in the comments if you want. Is this a rebuild or a reset? What are you thinking right here? How you feeling about it? Are you trusting it? How are you feeling about the direction of your Miami Dolphins? It's the Squad Show. Quick break. We'll keep it going on the other side. And I get a chance to talk to you about one of my favorite times of year, March Madness, college basketball. Nonstop, right? Big games, tight spreads, momentum swings every single night. From early tip-offs to late-night West Coast shootouts, there's always action on the board. And now FanDuel is giving you a way to turn that energy into even bigger potential wins with a basketball parlay profit boost. That's right. You can build any college hoops parlay you want. Rivalry games, ranked matchups, whatever. It doesn't matter. You can mix spreads, totals, and player props to match how you see the slate playing out. However you see it, that's what matters, right? You get that money going and you get that action going. It's all about you, right? Then you apply that profit boost and instantly bump up the potential payout. Go safe, go bold, ride with the team you've been following all season. It's your parlay, your style, now with more upside behind it, like a turbo boost, right? Head to FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com. FanDuel, play your game and get that profit boost going with FanDuel. All right, there we have it. That's Z and Kyle. I'm Grease. Waddle's gone. Achane, they're saying, is staying, part of the plan. We're going to talk about the draft in a minute and see if this changes anything at number 11, because now the wide receiver room is looking like the pass rush, edge of that defensive line room, obviously, right? So I'm saying, so a couple of things there really lacking for Miami in that defensive back room as well, Kyle. So just throw a wide receiver into the mix now, Kyle, of all those positions of need for those stockpile draft picks.
My fault. Don't get mad at me.
I was like, oh, God,
it's not you, Z. It's me. I had to pop the can on my liquid death. I didn't want to interrupt the ad break.
Oh, let it rip, baby. Let it rip.
I don't love the idea of wide receiver at 11, just because I think when I look at the depth at wide receiver and acknowledging they're probably going to double dip and knowing that you come back on the board again at 30. You look at the pass rush opportunities and you look at the offensive line opportunities. To me, this feels like a draft where I'm going to have guys in the same tier at both positions at 11. Which one runs out first? Like where in a draft traditionally do teams covet? Where's all the money getting spent right now? And you see what these guards are getting paid. You see what the tackles are getting paid. The pass rush is always a premium thing. I think you're going to see a big line of scrimmage run in this first round. And knowing that Miami has that leveraged position at 11 and then can come back. And I would just hate for you to like see a run happen and then come back at 30 and take the last player in a queue because now you feel handcuffed to say, oh, well, we don't want to get left without a guy who could play offensive line, but maybe you reach on a guy. And that's what happens when you draft Austin Jackson at 18, right? Was that whole offensive tackle run that happened with Andrew Thomas and Tristan Wirfs. And there's some reports that they tried to get up for Tristan Wirfs, but the team that traded back with Tampa Bay didn't want to go down too far. So they only did I think it was San Francisco, did like a one pick swap, like 14 and 15 to make sure that they got the guy that they wanted. They didn't want to drop too far. So part of it is value, but part of it is also, okay, like how big are the player pools at each position within the tier of where you're picking, like a top 12 pick? Like how many guys do you think are worth that? And then who do you think is going to still be there when 30 comes back around? I think you're going to not have too many chances to get home run trench play on the edges, whether that's an offensive tackle or a guard who could play tackle, or whether that's a guy who could rush the passer. Those wells, I think, dry up pretty quick. That's where I would tend to favor. And then at 30 and 43, or whether it's 43 and 75, 30 and 90, like whatever combination, if you like two wide receivers, like go get them there. But that's kind of just how I am currently reading the lay of the land.
Z, are you with that?
Oh, I'm always about that. I mean, at 11, I think as of now, you would have to, really think about that pass rusher because they're so hard to find. And you just look at what guys were getting paid this year in free agency and what people were giving up just to go trade for one. I mean, Micah was 2 first. Max theoretically was 2 first, right?
Yeah.
And then what Trey got
$30 million a year.
Yeah. I mean, and with the cap problem, you're sitting at 11 and, and it's just such a great year for, especially edge rushers. There's an abundance of them. So, it's not like there's, I remember the one year Myles Garrett. It was just Myles Garrett and then some guys, really. Solomon Thomas got drafted 3rd overall. He wasn't no Myles Garrett. He wasn't like this. It wasn't like this draft class, So I think at 11, you got to look really hard, and especially if your guys there that you like is that outside rusher, you got to take him because he's not going to be there at 30. That's for sure. 30, you can go wide receiver or a DB, or if there's a guard that gets down there, But I think to get a pass rusher, you got to get him at 11.
And you might not get the one you want at 11, Kyle, either as the projections play out. I mean, we might not see David Bailey or Arvell Reese or Ruben Bain or any of those guys. They'll probably all be off the board by 11. And that's why some experts like Mel Kiper have the Dolphins taking a guy like Colton Hood at number 30 and going receiver at 11. But to your point, Kyle, if it is a receiver at 11 and you take a list of players, I'm intrigued by that. I love that approach. Take a list of players who you would say are worthy of the number 11 pick at each position. And those guys at receiver, it's 3 guys, and they might not be there either. It's Tyson from ASU, it's Tate from Ohio State, and it's Lemon from USC, and then you're looking at tight end. It's the kid from Oregon, Kenyon. So those guys might all be gone. All the edge rushers might be gone. The top defensive backs might be gone too. I mean, we're talking about 11 here, not 5. So a lot of it's going to be dictated by who they take in front of you. But if all those DNs are off the board at 11 already, all those top 4, man, I mean, they're really going to be in a spot. I think at that point, you'd almost have to trade down, Kyle.
Yeah, I think the good news is you mentioned the 3 edge rushers, plus the quarterback in Fernando Mendoza. Then you take the 3 Ohio State kids. There's Arvell Reese, Caleb Downs, Sonny Styles. That's how many guys? That's 3, 6, 7 guys. Mm-hmm. Now you're getting into, if the 3 other wide receivers all go, then you're going to have the corner, and you'll have
Maui Noah,
right? Who we didn't mention, right? Like, I think my block of guys that I really, really covet is about 3 players long, and those guys realistically probably will not make it to 11. So then the game becomes, how many guys do you have first round grades on? How many guys do you feel comfortable with drafting at 11? It's always an awkward spot because you're picking 11. You would love to have a player that you had a top 10 value on because you're just outside the top 10 fall into your lap. But more often than not, like, as you're grading for your own individual scheme and you have your own character filters and personality filters and all that stuff, the guys that check all the boxes, it's a really small list. Very rarely do you hit 10, right? Like, there were some years you hear the stories about the old Patriots draft boards, and they'd have 75 players on it for a whole draft because their criteria was so defined on what they were looking for. They would grade guys on every 53-man roster spot. What spot do they fill? Are they better than who we have now? Right? Like, those are some of the conversations that those draft rooms have and take place. So I'd be surprised if one of those like top 10 graded guys gets to you at 11. How deep down can you go to feel like, hey, we're picking in the teens, we're getting an appropriate value player? And if you're not, if that well runs up on you because it's kind of the top of the draft does feel a little thin, can you get a trade partner to come up, and are they willing to give up 2027 capital? You could very easily talk me into moving back into the 20s if a team's willing to give you a first-round pick next year in addition to like a mid-round pick and their pick in the 20s to come up, because that puts you in the sweet spot, I think, for the Mesidors of the world, the TJ Parkers of the world, That puts you in the second tier of wide receivers. That puts you comfortably in kind of the defensive backs, whether that's some of these other safeties like Dylan Thieneman from Oregon or a corner, Avian Terrell. Like that opens up like this whole other tier that we're not really talking about because we're sitting here looking at the top 10 wondering what guy's going to fall out of the top 10.
Interesting, too, that maybe quarterback gets talked about more now with, that late first-round pick being thrown into the mix.
For Miami?
Yeah, I mean, it could be a conversation again. I mean, I know you're bringing in Willis and you got Simpson, but later in the draft, you got Nussmeier, you got Carson Beck. Are you really going to go all in on Willis and say he's the guy?
I'm boycotting.
I see that, Kyle.
You're boycotting?
Cameras off.
Asking, Kyle, and I'm telling you, no, I mean, people want a quarterback, man. People always want a quarterback, and Simpson will be there, and Nussmeier, and Carson.
I think 30 is still too rich for a quarterback.
You guys have both said that you wouldn't be surprised if they draft another quarterback this year.
Yeah, just but not in the first round.
Okay,
right.
Just not in the first. Okay.
Yeah, I think that for me is if you get 4th, 5th round and you like a guy like that, to me is where, and then that way you're not, because if you sign Malik Willis and then you draft a quarterback with a 1st-round pick now, if you go 4 and 13 and you get a top 5 pick in a good quarterback class next year, you're kind of handcuffed to like not take a quarter. Like it becomes so much overkill that you have this sunk cost element where you might not even see the draft pick play this year because you're paying Malik Willis the cash, right? So I would rather have you took a swing with Malik, get a guy with some traits behind it, and then if the bottom falls out and it's not good and you pick in the top 5 with a great quarterback class next year, you're not beholden to anything because then it's just Malik. It's a day 3 guy and then Malik with one more year of guaranteed money that those two guys can come in and compete against each other in 2027.
Yeah, that's the last thing that I want to go through on this podcast this season is a quarterback controversy. And we drafted a guy in the 1st or 2nd round and we paid a guy and oh my God, no.
Surely a bunch of rational opinions will come from that, right?
Yeah, I mean, then we're in a hamster wheel all over again. I like what Sully's doing. Like I said, you went out and you got a guy. You got probably the number 1 guy that everybody talked about in the quarterback, free agent market. And now you sit on it and you go late day 2 at the earliest for a quarterback if there's someone there. If not, you get one later day 3 and you roll with it because you got a quarterback from last year who started some games for you as your backup as of now. You build a room the following year if you have to. You took your swing. If it pans out, you're golden. But if you get a guy in the 2nd or 1st round, it's going to be controversy. As soon as the guy has a bad game, what are the fans are going to be saying? And what is the owner going to be saying? You went out and got a guy, then you've drafted a guy high. I mean, come on, that's bad business. The
Falcons did it to Cousins last year, remember? 2 years.
That's a good point, Grease. But like that ended up being such a nuclear situation.
Yeah,
because like Kirk was then pissed because he came in and signed, and then they rug pulled him like a month and a half later. And he was a good foot soldier about it, but like the Falcons ate a bunch of money. Penix ended up like they had Raheem Morris came into this year and they really didn't know what they had in Penix because he only played a handful of games and that whole group got fired, as a result of that. And Morris was only there 2 years, right? It was at least the GM was there with the previous head coach. And you could look at like all the investments in the pass rush room and how wasteful that was. And then the quarterback thing. And like, I certainly think they were justified to move on from the GM, but like Raheem Morris, they never even had a chance to figure out the offense, but they came into this year not knowing what they had in the 1st round pick. And then Kirk Cousins had the injury and they chose to keep him and they paid him a bunch of extra money instead of trying to offload him last year. So you're talking sunk cost on sunk cost. And I'm pro taking swings, but there's a difference between sunk cost and just being outright wasteful. And I think that was really a red mark on the resume for all those decision makers in Atlanta with how that whole thing turned out.
And Matt Ryan ends up there as a result. I'm not saying I would take a quarterback, but I would say this. I would not be overly confident in 2 guys, 1 and 2 on my QB depth chart who have less than 10 career starts between them if I'm the Miami Dolphins. I just wouldn't be. I mean, I know they have a lot of other needs.
Bringing another guy in that doesn't have any starts is going to fix that.
Not going to fix
All
it.
Grease want is Beck. We know what you want. Grease.
No, I don't want Beck. Z,
He's
I
going
don't.
I'm at 30. You're trying to get him at 30.
They have less than 10 starts between them. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying I would take one. I'm not saying I like any of the QBs. It's a thin year, but I'm saying, are we really that confident in that QB room? I mean, honestly speaking, are we? I'm not. I can tell you that right now. I'm from Missouri. You're gonna have to show me.
Oh God, let it go.
I'm serious.
I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you that they're not going to take one until day 3 at the earliest.
Day 3?
All right?
Okay.
And I'm fine with that. I'm completely fine with that. Because again, this is you can say what you want. This is a rebuild team right now, and the benefits will happen in year 3. It hopefully gets sooner, but I'm looking at year 3 for this team. The way Sully's going about doing this, and I'm all for it. I've been on some try to quick fix. Let's band-aid a team together and go play, and it never works out ever. I mean, no different than St. Louis. It took us 3 years, and we finally got over the hump.
Real quick thought before we go to break on that. Think about Detroit when they hired Dan Campbell, right? And they come in and they were 3-13-1, and then they started the following season 1-6, and the owner came out at 1-5 and gave like the vote of confidence. So that they were 4-19 in the first 23 games under Dan Campbell. And then they jumped on top of the Dolphins early that year, and the Dolphins came back and won the game. And then they proceeded to win 7 of the next 9 games that they played. And then the following year they went, that was the 12-5 season. So it took a year and a half's worth of games building it right with a non-traditional quarterbacks pivot, because they went to Jared Goff when they traded, right? They traded Stafford and got Goff. And everybody's like, why did they do that? It was just a throwaway in the deal. But they liked him. They had part of their management group was over in LA and knew Jared from his time in LA. And it took time. And they've said outright, it's going to take some time to get it all aligned. So I agree with Z. I think 2026 will not be an entertaining year in the form of wins and losses. I think you're going to be looking for the other storylines to find fulfillment in watching the team. But you're rooting to see what players separate themselves, what players show growth. It's going to be a really young team. They'll make some mistakes. Who's not making the same mistakes twice? Then in 2027, I think kind of you have that scrappy upstart element about you, but you still need some pieces. And then you get through that. If you hit your draft picks the way that you're supposed to, then at that point you could start looking at the runway of where they're going and say, okay, like I feel really good about their ability to compete moving from that point forward.
And if they did hit on Willis the way some people think they did, I'm not saying they didn't hit on him. I'm just telling you about the number of career starts he has. If they did hit on Willis the way some people think they did for that money, then that could be the steal. Of the last 10 years, 15 years for the Miami Dolphins. I want to get more from Z on the other side. Z, you just stoked the fire in me, man, talking about the teams that you were on and the way that they were built. And I like that, man. I love this conversation. They love it in the chat, too.
I think you want to talk about Beck some more.
No, Beck. I don't want Beck. I don't like Carson Beck. I don't know where you got that idea.
He's from the U.
He's from the U. I didn't want him at the U. I didn't want him when he was there. I didn't want him when they signed him.
Natty, though. Took you to a Natty game.
He got taken to a natty. Let's put it that way. He made some plays. I'll give him that, but he got taken to a natty, and he lost the natty with the interception late in the game. I'm not a big Beck fan is my point. I don't want to crap on him either, but
let's go to break.
We got to go to break, Z. Kyle's got Indeed. We're going to keep it going.
Workplace chaos, deadline staffing up, your inbox is overflowing, and the one position you have to fill is still sitting open when the pressure's on and you need the right hire. Sounds like a job for Indeed sponsored jobs. Indeed sponsored jobs helps you reach the people who actually fit what you're looking for, skills, experience, location. So you're not just hoping the right candidate falls into your lap. Here's a stat that says it all. In the minute that I'm going to talk to you guys about Indeed, companies like yours have made 27 hires in Indeed worldwide, according to their data. So if you're hiring, spend less time searching, more time interviewing candidates who check all your boxes with Indeed sponsored jobs. Listeners of this program get a $75 sponsored jobs credit to help your job get the premium status it deserves at Indeed.com/podcast. Just go to Indeed.com/podcast right now. Show your support for our show by saying that you heard about it on the show. Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions do apply. If you need to hire, it sounds like a job for Indeed sponsored jobs.
There we go. Nice job, Kyle. If you need to hire, Indeed sponsors job. Indeed. And Z, I was intrigued by that, man, the way that you talked about building a team. And it took 3 years in St. Louis. And you were on some of those teams. You were on some great teams. You were on some rebuilds. You were on some teams that were really good on defense, but not so good on offense, like Miami minus Ricky Williams, right? But you talked about the way the Rams did it, and you talked about year 3. Can you just go a little deeper with that?
Well, yeah. I mean, year 3 was we went out and we signed Trent Green as our starting quarterback. And then, we had Kurt Warner was in the building. We had, who else? I forget. The Ohio State kid we drafted in the 2nd or 3rd round. What was his name?
Hoyer?
I can't think. No, it
Wasn't Hoyer.
Oh, little kid.
Joe Germain?
God. Maybe that's
Joe
who
Germain?
it was.
Joe
Jake
Germain,
Plummer in the Rose
Joe
Bowl,
Germain. Yeah.
Ohio State, 1999.
Yeah.
Arizona kid who beat ASU in the Rose Bowl, Joe Germain. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and then, we traded for, like I said, we traded for Marshall Falk, and bit by bit, we drafted Torrey Holt and Andre Bott, in that draft with Joe and, a couple other guys. And, we just start piecing things together, and it just took off. I believe it was the 4th preseason game when Trent got hurt and blew his knee out against the Chargers. Rodney Harrison with the nasty hit, on the quarterback, loaded the knee and blew his knee out. And, and then we had Kurt. You just didn't know, some guy that, nobody really knew about. He was a practice squad guy. He was NFL Europe guy. He bounced around. Everybody knows the story, bagging groceries and all that. And blah 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 blah. But we just we bonded together. We just every year we get new people. And people were coming and going. And we just took off. I mean, I was in Carolina in '95, the first year of existence, and you talk about patchwork. I mean. I got there. I got cut by the Steelers, and they picked me off the waiver wire on last cuts, and that's how I got there. I wasn't part of the expansion draft. I showed up there, and every week, Bill Pauling was our GM, president. He was the GM, and every week there was 5 new guys on the team. Every week they had a huge workout on Tuesday, and 5 guys got signed and 5 guys got cut. I mean, it was like a revolving door. Wow. I mean. You had old players, you had, young players, and, and they start patching again. And then the next year, I wasn't there, but they went to the championship game. And so did Jacksonville that year. But both those teams were, Jacksonville was built a little bit younger than Carolina was. I mean, our quarterback room that year was Kerry Collins, who they drafted 1st overall, Jack Trudeau, and Frank Wright. That was our quarterback room. I mean, again, you had some dudes name-wise, at the end of their career. Pete Metzelar was on the team. I can't think of the running back that the Jets took 1st overall from Penn State. Blair
Thomas.
Blair Thomas was on the team for a little bit, and like I said, guys were coming and going, and it was it's different how each team was built, not soapboxing, but when I was in Pittsburgh, it was kind of different. Once they got the defensive set, they just would plug guys in, kind of like New England was doing for a while. They know their player. They know who they're going to get, because he may not be like everybody else's choice, but they knew they would fit in their system. You look at the Steeler defense back in the day, all those outside linebackers, it started with, I was there, was Kevin Green and Greg Lloyd. And then they went, Vrabel, comes in at one point, he's an outside backer, and, what's his name? Joey Porter, and Harrison, and, they just keep plugging guys in, and Watt now. They get those kind of guys that fit that role, and that's same with the linebackers. They always had a big linebacker. I had Levon Kirkland, who was 260, 265, playing backer who could run. But, you're playing a 3-4, a lot of guards are getting up and centers are getting up on those backers. And, he was just another D lineman really playing in there, these big bruising guys, but they would plug guys in, and no different than New England. The offense, the little slot receiver, Wes Welker, then it went to Edelman, and, they kept, I know they're all white and little guys, but they just would plug that kind of player in that position, and then they got Randy Moss to stretch the field a little bit, And that's just how they would build it, and that's when you start doing that and you get that going, especially as a GM and scouting department, you're set up for success. And that's how I see it here, what Sully's doing on both sides of the ball. He's getting his guys that he wants in here, and he's building the capital to draft those guys to build it. So like I said, it's gonna probably take 3 years to see the picture, because he's not just gonna patchwork it together just to win games, just to make it look good. He had a plan. That's why they hired him. That's why that whole trust that was built, and they liked his plan and how he's going to build this team. It's going to take a while, and that's what they're going to have to do. That's why they're swallowing the big cap this year, so they can go out next year and sign some veteran players to fill in some holes here and there that fits their plan.
You almost need a little of everything. Z, that's a great breakdown, by the way. Kyle, you almost need a little of everything. I was just thinking about that Rams team that Z was talking about, right? Marshall Faulk was a trade. A lot of those guys were draft picks, like Leonard Little and Torrey Holt and Dre Bly and those guys. Or Leonard Little,
Orlando Pace.
Yeah, but you have to hit on free agents. You have to hit in the draft. And, just by the way, you have some guy walking off the street from bagging groceries to take over for Trent Green. So they got lucky on Warner. They hit on the draft with several guys. They hit big on a trade for Falk. So it just goes to show you, just with that one example, what it takes, Kyle, to build a winner in the NFL.
Well, I think you can blend that with what he was talking about with Pittsburgh and some of these other organizations that know what they're looking for, right? And that was the whole MO of the previous regime here, was the GM shops for the groceries and lets kind of the coach dictate what he wants and what he's looking for. But then you change coaches every 3.5 years. So the criteria changes and the scheme changes. And now this guy doesn't fit anymore. So we got to get rid of these guys. And we got to bring these guys in to fit what we want to do this way instead. And you're just treading water, right? So that's when the conversation goes to trust. We're talking about a 3-year plan to get this team highly competitive and maximizing a roster. You think about what they did when they brought in Flores and did that in 19. What happened after the third year? They had reached the point where they were supposed to be maximizing that build of the roster. They fired the coach, and they spent the whole season flirting with Deshaun Watson with 20-something sexual assault allegations against him, and they won 1 game before the trade deadline. And then they won 8 of the last 9 games after the trade deadline passed when it was past them.
God, they didn't get Deshaun Watson. That's all I'm going to say. Thank God.
So when people roll their eyes about the relationship with the Packers guys and Jeff Hafley and Jon-Eric Sullivan trusting each other and this, that, the other thing, like, this is why it's important, because this is going to take time. And you don't want the coach looking over his shoulder at the GM, being worried that the GM's talking to the owner about how the coach isn't doing his job right, so that the coach gets fired so the GM can save his job security, so that 2 years after they hire a new coach, the coach says, hey, the GM's not doing a good enough job picking my players. And then they fire the GM, and you go back to the seesaw firing a guy every other 3 years, right? Like, that's why it matters. That's why it's important that this trust in this relationship exists, so that you can build it the right way. And these guys are all rowing in the same direction, and they have the same universal belief, because that's what's going to prevent you from cutting corners, prematurely feeling the pressure to win, and it's what's going to stop the infighting that you go back to the first decade that Steve Ross owned the team, whether it was Tony Sperano and Jeff Ireland or Joe Philbin and Jeff Ireland with Don Aponte as the referee between the two of them. And then you can't hire a GM because you're trying to stick somebody with Joe Philbin, who was there and very clearly on the hot seat. So then you just hire Dennis Hickey, who was like your 8th choice. And then you get rid of Dennis Hickey after 1 year and you bring in Mike Tannenbaum, but then you hire Chris Greer from within to take the spot. And he's there. And then Mike Tannenbaum's there for 3 years over the Adam Gase years. And then you get rid of Adam Gase and you promote Mike Tannenbaum out of his position and you promote Chris. It's just like an orgy of disarray with the thought behind who is doing what and why. So hearing these stories from Z and the places he's been in Polian and churning the bottom 10% of the roster every single week, or Pittsburgh and the coaching stability that they have and how that allows you to know exactly what you're looking for to fill a specific role on your roster. Or I talked about the Patriots and their draft boards and pairing that with Z and what they were looking for with receivers. That's why it matters. That's why it's so important that this is the path that they chose to go. And that doesn't guarantee that it's going to work, but I think it gives you the best chance for it to work.
Kyle, I know you're a big Mandich guy. Orgy of disarray. The Mad Dog would have loved that one. That would have made his list right there. Cheers
just
to the
look at
Mad Dogs. Green
look at
Lizards for everyone.
look at what the Commanders did like 2 years ago. They had all this cap room and everything, and I was in the building, and we were a bad team, and Dan Quinn came in and Adam Peters, and they kind of patchworked it with some older players.
Yep.
You spent a lot of money, and they won.
1-year deals.
Yeah, and they won. And then last year it was disarray over there. So that's what I'm saying. Sully doesn't want, and half don't want to do that. They want to do it for the long haul. They're not looking for the quick hitter. And I get it. Maybe ownership said, "Hey, I want some wins this year in Washington." Maybe that was said. I don't know. I wasn't there. I didn't talk to anybody there. I'm just observing from the outside, and have been in the business for a while, how things are ran in some places, or my opinion, let me put it that way. And, they were disarrayed. They turned over their whole coaching staff, on both sides of the ball this year, but they did the quick hit, and they got asses in the seats again. They got everybody, they got a new stadium, which is great for that city and great for that organization, and just see what happens this year now, because they're back to square one, really.
Square one was where the Miami Dolphins are, and you think about building around Achane with Malik Willis coming in and what they might do in the draft, but certainly this franchise is a little bit devoid of stars right now. Achane might be, wow, he is the biggest one, but he might be the only one right now in a Miami Dolphins uniform. But I will say this before we take our last break, guys, whoever comes here and wins, whoever, and it will happen, whoever comes in here and wins will replace Pat Riley and Don Shula atop the Mount Rushmore of South Florida sports. Whoever can finally turn this Dolphins franchise around and win a Super Bowl is going to literally eat for free forever in South Florida. We have one more break to take. Just wrap it up on the other side. What a good show. Thanks for that insight, Z. That's great stuff, man. I know we're not getting that anywhere else, but appreciate that. And we're going to wrap things up on the other side. Quick one for the YouTubers. And by the way, if you're listening, if you're downloading on Spotify, Apple, iHeart, Stitcher, Podbean, wherever you get your podcasts, come on over and give us a follow on YouTube as well. The numbers are mirroring one another now as Kyle continues to build this channel. Big day yesterday. Thanks to all the everydayers and all the rest of you who helped make that show a huge success on the Waddle trade and who helped make us one of the top channels on the #1 sports podcast network in the world. And with that, we wrap it up. Just a quick aside on the Waddle deal. Kyle, did you see all the crap that the Broncos were getting in Denver? The Broncos haven't made one deal. Like every radio station, every article, there was a rip in the Broncos. And then all of a sudden they bring in Jaylen Waddle and it quieted them down a little bit.
Well, it sounds like these talks kind of started at the beginning of free agency. So Denver kind of is working through these negotiations and, hey, we don't want to spend the money. We're giving draft picks and giving Waddle $17 million this year and 24 next year. Maybe let's hold the phone and just kind of retain our own guys and try to get a piece. And one of my colleagues at A to Z Sports had some sources in Denver that he talked to after this deal went down, and he alluded to kind of the framework of a 1 and a 3 was pretty locked and loaded pretty early on at the start of free agency, and it was just Denver trying to hold out hope, hoping that they could get like a little bit of kickback with it. And I guess on Tuesday, that's when they settled on the pick swap where Miami moved down 19 spots in the 4th round from 111 to 130. And that was enough to kind of push it over the top. So it sounds like Denver had that whole free agency process playing, knowing full well, hey, we feel pretty good about our chances to get this one locked in and done.
Yeah, I think it's a great move for Denver, because they were so close last year, and like I said, it could push them over the top, for the playoffs and the Super Bowl run next year, So that's how I thought it was a win-win for both teams.
Nick Westbrook-Achane finds a new team as well. That's being announced today. 5 years in Tennessee, 2-year deal with the Dolphins last offseason. Obviously played college ball at Indiana. So the Indianapolis Colts bring him in to replace Michael Pittman Jr., who they traded, Kyle. And so Westbrook-Achane catches on with the Colts, guys.
Yeah, best of luck to him in Indy. It was not a pretty scene here in Miami this past year where he got sat down towards the end of the year where they were worried about his snaps and counting against the compensatory pick formula and costing the team the Javon Holland pick. But I guess they had Ashton Davis hit a performance incentive that cost him that pick anyway when it was all said and done. But felt like you saw the role, right? I think about Nick Westbrook-Achane, and I think about the tight end that they had brought in as well, Pharaoh Brown from New England, I think was where his most recent stop was. Those two guys, you could see like a specific role. Like I thought Pharaoh Brown could potentially be a move in the right direction for the inline tight end spot. And Westbrook-Achane as the vertical playing guy, as the big body guy, because that's what he was in Tennessee. He wasn't a high yield target guy, but he was a guy who would win some catches down the field. And they tried to fit those guys within the structure of the offense that they had before, where Pharaoh Brown, instead of being the inline guy, is trying to line up at H-back and take the blocks in space and connect with guys. And it just didn't feel like it was a great fit. And I think for Nick, it felt like the same thing with a lot of the timing routes and short and intermediate stuff didn't really jive with what I thought his skill set was best served to be. So maybe the Indianapolis offense can get him back in a position where it can play some of his strengths.
Yeah, and to Z's point from the other day, and I think it's worth repeating and saying again, I'm happy to see guys go and get their cash. I'm happy when guys find themselves in a better position. It's not their fault they got paid that money and things didn't work out. I mean, well, if things didn't work out, it's partially their fault. But what I'm saying here is Z's point, and I know you back me up on this, Z, to see Bradley Chubb go to a place where he's going to be able to compete. I hate to see that it's Buffalo. You don't want it to be Buffalo. And thank God it's not Buffalo for Waddle, by the way. I don't know if Sully would have lived that one down. But my point is you want to wish them well. You're happy they're moving on to a good situation for themselves, and you're happy that they're not the Dolphins' problem anymore with that cap mess.
Oh, yeah, without a doubt. But we do have a cap mess. Last time I checked, it's pretty messy. But again, we're going to get out of it in flying colors here in a year or two. You know, that's the thing. And that's why I love I'm so like I was a little worried going into this offseason, and I was like, oh, God, this could be just doom and gloom. But now, every time I read something in the paper that we're making moves and this, that, and the other, and we're really taking the big hit this year, I am so fine with it because I see a lot of good things in the future for this team and the way Sully and Half are building this thing. And I think it's the right two guys in the building. Like I'm gonna keep saying it, and if they keep this path, I mean, I think this team has finally got a chance to be good, to be really good.
What would you like to see them do next, Z, to keep that momentum going for you? More of the same?
More of the same. Again, eventually I'm going to start really watching more of this, these draft prospects, and get a good feel for that because that's the next hurdle for the brain trust there in Dolphin land is to nail the draft. They got to nail this draft. I mean, you're going to miss on some guys, but I'm not really worried about the first and second round picks. That's not what because that's a crapshoot. I think it's the third round on because that's how you build that core team. And I go back to St. Louis. That's how our team was built, was our core players, both through the draft and free agency. That Charlie Army, our GM, and Dick Vermeil and everybody else in that building that built that team. That's where it came from. Was the core guys. We had Ricky Prohl, he as a wide receiver, he was a kind of a starter, but he was also just a core guy. He was our number 3, and he held the glue in that receiver room because we had Isaac Bruce, Torrey Holt, we had Ricky, we had Achane, Tony Horn. I mean, we had some dudes in that room now. You can say that the guy packing the groceries was good, but he had some dudes around him to make him really good early, and that helps,
They threw him in a Ferrari, Z.
Without a doubt.
I mean, a Ferrari, brand new.
You got Marshall behind you who's going to go for 100 on the ground, 100 in the air every game. You had a left tackle who's all world, and
Orlando
we had a good old line and Adam Timmerman. I can go down a list of all the little cats over there. I mean, but it was built on core guys because when a guy went down, we just plug the guy in there and he was able to go and play, and that's what I can see this team doing. The way some of the guys that they've signed already, and how they're going to build this team. They're going to go get guys that are elites. Eventually, they're going to build elites into the program. But you need the core guys that can go out and do the dirty work and give you quality reps, 20 to 30, like on D-line type guys, and some good linebackers that can play special teams. As backups, and same with the secondary and the safeties. And then also, on the offense, you're going to get some core guys, and that's where those picks come from in the third round on.
And I could see, Kyle, to your point on number 11, if they do pick at number 11, recent history being in the forefront of every Dolphins memory. I mean, the last thing this team wants to do, the last thing Jon-Eric Sullivan wants to do is take that sexy pick at number 11 and miss on a receiver. That would probably be the worst case scenario.
Yeah, I think what I'm most impressed with what they've done so far is that they haven't been a prisoner of the moment. They're acting like a high self-esteem franchise, right? This is what we need to do. This is what we're going to do. We're not going to let, public perception of trading Jaylen Waddle, or we're not going to let public perception of moving on from Tua or trading Minkah Fitzpatrick for a 7th round pick to free up the cap space so we could sign Malik Willis. Like it's very, we feel comfortable in our evaluations and what we're doing, and we understand what needs to be done. So you extend that to the draft, like whoever they choose to be that pick, I'd be surprised if it's a skill player, because they talked about building from the inside out. And you're going to have lots of bites at the apple at that spot. But I did want to have a comment that kind of stuck with me from what Z was talking about the third round and later, and like the middle rounds of the draft. And that's where these executives really, those guys who make those evaluations, like really make their hay. It is really impressive to go back and look at, he was talking about those Rams teams. You can go back, and they had like a 7-year stretch where the Rams drafted, starting in 96, like a 10-plus year start, 95, excuse me, a 10-plus year starter in the NFL that was not drafted in the first round. Whether that was Zach Weigert at guard, who they got in the 2nd round, or Fred Miller at tackle. I'm going to get some defensive guys, don't worry. But the first two just so happen to be offensive line with a lot of runway.
No, I know.
Ryan Tucker, another offensive lineman in the 4th round in 97. So he was the other tackle that came with Orlando Pace. Leonard Little, they got as a defensive end with 87.5 career sacks. They drafted him 65th overall in 98.
He was actually a linebacker when he came from Tennessee.
Yep.
So there's a projection element with a guy like that, right? Mm-hmm. To have the vision on what you want and to make that leap. We mentioned Dre Bly. He's a 2nd round pick, a 7-year starter in the league, 43 career interceptions. John St. Clair, Brian Young at defensive tackle in 2000. Manu Maliuna, the tight end. He was a starter for 8 years in the league, had 13 career touchdowns. So he played for a decade. So guys like that, none of those guys are 1st-round draft picks. So that's where if you're going to really make your hay, that's where you do it.
And we had Roland Williams. Wasn't he on that list?
Roland Williams.
He might have got drafted a little earlier than where
I'm going to throw something else at you to that point, Kyle and Z. What do Zach Thomas, Jason Taylor, Achane, for that matter, even the Marks brothers themselves have in common? None of them were 1st-round picks. The Duper was the 2nd. Jason Taylor, 3rd-round pick. Achane, 3rd-round pick. Zach Thomas, 5th-round pick. To your point, Z.
Jeff Skeena, 7th-round pick.
We should just end the show right there. That should be the mic drop. Real quick, guys, I just wanted to hit Achane again, and I know, Kyle, you're happy to be keeping him, and I just look at the Cowboys sitting behind you, really need a running back, and Jerry might do something crazy. Giants would probably take Jeremiah Love at 5. The Seahawks, they lost Kenneth Walker. The Chargers are looking for a guy. The Texans, maybe the Bears in that Ben Johnson offense. And I know it would have to blow your mind for if you're Sully to trade Achane. But what do you think a deal would look like if one of those teams or somebody else calls and says, hey, we want Achane, we'll throw the kitchen sink to you? What would the kitchen sink be for you?
I believe for them that conversation has to start with a 1st-round pick. Like if you're not putting that in there, then like we're not having this conversation, because they are intent on keeping him. It's a long-term starter that they're talking about getting rid of. So for me, it's probably like you got to start with a top 40 pick and go from there. I maybe give a little bit of leeway for like Houston has picked 38 as an example, or Washington I think has picked 37, right? Like some teams like that if you want to get into that conversation with that early too, like I'll hear what you have to say, but it's kind of like if Waddle was a 1+ and the plus being another top 100 pick, I think it starts with 1st-round equivalent. And if not, then, we'll play this thing out in the draft. And then maybe you get post-June 1st when you have a little bit more flexibility. And, maybe you see if any teams want to have an injury at defensive tackle, and Zach Sealer, who's a high salary guy who I love. Zach. He's an epitome of like the NFL journey to be a 7th round draft choice, get cut, get claimed on waiver wires, develop himself the way that he has, get paid to a $20 million a year contract. But if they're going to go the youth movement like that's kind of the last big money name, like on the doorstep, a 30 guy on the roster. So maybe that's the next trade piece if you get a little bit further down the road. But for Achane, that conversation has to start with first round equivalent trade package for me.
Same with you, Z.
Yeah, I mean, you got to think first. I mean, I could see maybe a second this year and a first next year, not to be completely greedy, if you really want to move the guy, maybe that comes into play, but again, it's got to be a first year this year or next year for me, to move on from that guy, preferably this year. To have 3 this year would be pretty amazing and, jump starter. But again, if you get a first next year and, a second this year, I'm cool with that because you get some good player in the second round and you have 2 firsts for next year. So, back-to-back years with 2 firsts always is nice.
Achane might find himself in a Ricky position here, Z. You remember those days with Ricky just getting beat to death by Wannstedt. I mean, Achane left, Achane right, Achane up the middle, Achane out of the backfield, Achane on a go. He's going to be a big part of that offense.
Yeah, I know, but it's different now. The game is so much different. Bobby Sloak, and I know he's got a lot of run in him because that's how they set up that offense, from the Shanahan tree. But at the end of the day, they get pass happy. He ain't like Dave, because Wani loved to run the ball because that's what that's what how Dallas was built. And when he was in Chicago, that's how he built Chicago, and that was his mentality, because he's old school. It's different nowadays. You don't run the ball that much.
Very much different. And I don't know, man. It's going to be a lot of fun to see what happens from here on out. But as we wrap it up, I guess maybe our closing comment should be on Sully. We can call him Sully now. I mean, everybody gets an A this time of year, right? But I think what Jon-Eric Sullivan has done, and look, you got Aikman in there, you got Marino in there, you got Stephen Ross in there. I mean, who knows how much input Hafley has as a group, as a collective, underneath the leadership of Jon-Eric Sullivan and Stephen Ross. Kyle, as a Dolphin fan, grade for him so far, and how optimistic, actually 3. Grade so far, how optimistic are you, and when was the last time you were at this level of optimism?
Probably midway through 23 when they were 9-3 and rolling, and then the Tennessee game happened when the wheels fell off the bus. Like, I mean, that was a great team that year. They just unfortunately had a bunch of injuries in 23. As far as the grade that I would give them so far, probably B+, A-. Like, if you're gonna sit here and get nitpicky, like, I do wonder what the trade market could have been for Minkah Fitzpatrick, but I understand they needed the cash to execute the signing that they had, right? I really like the plan with holding firm on the vet benefit salary contracts, and all of those guys not named Malik Willis are signing for 1.4 and on the books for 1.26, right? Like, so having that consistency and having the meaningful intent behind your moves with this year, I appreciate it. They're going to be tight against the cap the rest of the way until June at this stage, just because the Waddle thing accelerated some salary cap stuff. But you're clearing $175 million in dead cap off the books in one shot. That's no small lift. And I think that deserves to be applauded as a big picture of what they've done so far. And they got their guy who they really seem to believe at a quarterback on top of that.
And they have a clear path and a clear direction, Z, to your point, to that 3-year plan, right? A clear path to that 3 years.
Oh, yeah, without doubt. I mean, again, I said it earlier, I am shocked and I'm giddy about what they've done so far, how they're getting out of this hole that we were so worried about a few months ago. They're taking a huge hit this year, but they're doing it the right way. Similar to how Denver got out of their hole, and it's kind of ironic because, I guarantee if the old staff was still here, that trade never would have happened with Denver. I'm sure they're still pretty bitter about, them running the score up, out there, back a couple of years ago. Right. I mean, they put up 70-some points against the Broncos.
Yeah, that was a big, that was the one game where you're like, wow, this Dolphins team is one of the best offenses I've ever seen. And for it to end that way, for it to, with Waddle going, you don't you don't like to look in the rear view too much and whine and cry about things, because if you do, you get stuck there. But man, it just, what could have been with that group, the way it started, the way things were going with Tyreek Hill and Waddle, and then the emergence of Achane at what could have been the perfect time had Tyreek not had the troubles he had. And it just goes to show how quick the window can close in the NFL, guys. And that's my final thought is we put that previous era to bed. I think with Waddle leaving, that's it. That's a wrap. That team, that group, Tyreek, Waddle, Mostert was part of it, just did not work out. And that's the last of it going out the door right there. And man, it's definitely, it's not bittersweet. It's bitter. It looked like it would be sweet for a minute, but then it just got bitter. Kyle, before we wrap it up, just what else do you have coming up on the channel, man? He's been killing it. If you haven't seen what Kyle's done the last couple of days, make sure you go back and check it out.
We're going to see what news we get between now and the end of the week. We'll probably do a mailbag at the end of the week, and then we'll really start hitting the draft stuff heavy from there on.
All right. And we'll be back on Monday with another edition of your Dolphin Squad show on the #1 podcast network in the sports world, Locked On Podcast Network. Also your team every day. Of course, thank you so much from the everyday or right on down to if you're joining us for the first time, no matter where you are on YouTube, wherever you download your podcasts, and of course, on Roku over the top television. We'll be back on Monday. Till then, keep your game tight and your mind right. Thanks for being here on your Dolphin Squad show.